On March 24th through the 27th of 2023, I attended both the 2-day scoped carbine and 2-day precision rifle 1 courses in Reno, Nevada, offered by Bruiser Industries and instructed by none other than owner Joe Dawson. Now, you guys might remember Joe. I've had him on the show before. When I was back at SHOT Show in January, he was kind enough to come and spend a little time with me. And his episode was actually very popular. I encourage you to go give it a listen. It inspired me to go train with Joe. And let me tell you about these. I'm going to tell you about these classes. There were immersive courses lasting 2 days each and consisting of both stuff from a classroom and lecture perspective, as well as practical instruction, and then that application of that material and skills covered in each course. So we're going to get into that today. Jumping right in, here's the facts. Joe Dawson, Bruiser Industries, he's a self-proclaimed gun dork. Like I said, you've heard him on the show before, but he's also an author for many of your favorite firearms space websites and periodicals. You may have read him before. He was once operating under the name Joe Darwin as well, if you've read some of his older stuff. He spent 14 years as a U.S. Navy SEAL sniper and was the lead schoolhouse sniper instructor for Naval Special Warfare. He shot competitively in USPSA, IDPA, and PRS, and he currently instructs both civilians and LEO in both pistol and rifle, but he'll tell you his drug of choice is precision rifle. He might also say, if you talk to him, if you know Joe, because he's quite a character, that he likes long walks on the beach, German Shepherds, good bourbon, and Nicaraguan cigars. So here's the kind of the overview of these courses. I knew what I was getting into because there's very good descriptions of these online. If you go to his website, bruiserindustries.com, he does a really good job of sort of communicating, but just in brief, the Scope Carbine course is designed for an intermediate level or, somebody that's had a little bit of formalized training to expand their understanding of magnified optics. The course focuses on the use of, semi-auto carbines. So these are gas guns with those magnified optics, such as, perhaps an ACOG or a red dot with magnifier. However, most people are using an LPVO, and I would encourage that when going to these courses, particularly on the longer ranges that we were and distances we were shooting for this particular class. The goal is to add skills or skills foundation, which can enable, that continued improvement I think we're all looking for, and then give you some stuff to walk away with and do on your own. So you can, kind of do some self-guided practice there to improve your skills. I think that's the value that most of us are trying to take away when we go to one of these experiences. So it's not basic. So if you haven't had any time on your rifle or really any formalized instruction, you're not going to be covering things like weapon manipulations, reloads, stuff like that. You're definitely going to be going through some various positioning, standard and non-standard positions. You'll work through those, and you'll definitely be challenged physically in portions. I mean, you're up and down all day long, from prone to standing to kneeling and any number of things, but there is a little bit of a physical component, and I'll talk about that later in the podcast. Precision Rifle 1 is more of an introductory class as stated on the website, but I will tell you this. Joe's going to adjust that based on his audience, and he did that for us. I would say I might have been the least experienced in the precision rifle stuff, or let's just call it the bolt guns. When we walked in, I've had very little time behind a bolt gun, and I mean, I felt like this class moved as quickly as the carbine class, and he told us as much on the first 2 days that he would adjust accordingly, and I think he did that well. So. There's a list of equipment that you need. It's basics. It's what you'd expect. Obviously, you have to go equipped with a firearm with an appropriate optic. Things you want are specific ammo, match grade ammo. If you've not been around any of that stuff or ever shot that stuff, you're just using, you're shooting at 25, 50, maybe even 100 yards on the range. You may not have used that stuff before, so you want to be prepped in plenty of time. Order that, get that to your house. So you have it. Other things, notables would be like wind meter and ballistic calculator apps. Joe does a really good job of suggesting what you might need out there. Now, he has stuff for you to use. We'll cover that a little bit more later, but you could do a little prep work on your own to be ready for this thing. I'll talk about how much ammo I actually used while we were out there, but he makes a suggestion there. And then more specifically, if you're interested in kind of what I was using, two things. One, I was borrowing two of Joe's guns for both days. I was privileged to do that. I do not own bolt guns specific for this class. I have one in my life, not really appropriate for what we were doing. It's a 70s era Winchester 300 mag, wood chassis, no bipod. It's got an old crusty Leopold optic on it. It's got an old crusty sling on it. Just wouldn't have. It would not have worked well for this application. And then one of his carbines. I do not have an LPVO. It was suggested that would probably be the better thing to bring. And I would recommend if you've got one of those, make sure you're using that versus like an EOTech with a magnifier, aim point, something like that. I think you're just going to get a lot more out of this class, and put that out up front. So I was using a 14.5-inch 5.56 rifle. It had a Vortex razor on it, 1x10, and I was shooting 77 grain ammo, which was the recommended ammo for the class. For PRS, which was the second 2 days, like I said, I used a 20-inch 308. It was mounted with a zero compromise optic, and if you're looking for a model number, you're really curious, it's the ZCO 420. And I was shooting 175 grain ammo, as were most everybody else there. Again, there's a list of equipment for you to bring and pack, and we used all of it. There was nothing extraneous on there, and I was glad to have the stuff that I took. Things like a backpack with a little extra clothing in it because we were building shooting positions, things like that. I'll talk about that, as well as a rear support bag. That was helpful. I got to use several, but I purchased one on my own. That was absolute. I feel like that's a necessity. So there are things there. You go through the list, you decide what you need, and enjoy your time. So you enjoy your time. All right, let's start at square one. So without trying to bore everybody, I just want to kind of break into a couple of things. If you've listened to any of my previous sort of after action reports or reviews on courses, and I've done a couple, and or on like coaching sessions on the fitness side of the house, which is what we cover on the other episodes, you've heard me get into how important I feel the intake process is from the coach and the student. Good coaches do their best, or at least attempt to do their best at gathering a good deal of information on the student or about their clients up front and before they actually get there. So there's some type of an initial evaluation. That can be done a lot of different ways. But for me, this typically happens way before the first day of the session. It gives both the instructor and the student some things to kind of think about and an opportunity to ask some more informed questions and gather some more information so that each gets their communication across and gets out of the experience what they both hope to get out of it. I think that's important. So upon enrolling in these courses, I went through a fairly thorough questionnaire online. Again, bruiserindustries.com. And then after that, I had some comms with Joe, lots of comms with Joe, actually. And as it turns out, a lot of the other students did too. In fact, I think every student did at some level, with the exception of maybe some of the group on the third and fourth day, and I'll get into that later. But I know there was a lot of IG comms back and forth just to make sure we were squared away. Joe's very responsive, and he prides himself on being thorough there. He answers everything you send him, and whether you're going to a class or not, it's become sort of a comedy point. We were talking about how many DMs he gets a day and how many things he's answering. If you watch his Instagram at all, there'll be portions during the work week. There'll be literally like 75 questions and answers in his stories, up to the point where Instagram won't let him post anymore. So he's all over it. There's no doubt he highly respects the people that have chosen to, one, even ask the question, let alone get into his courses. So I think that's something notable, and that's definitely you're going to get the attention you deserve when you sign up with something with Joe, or just send him a message. Bottom line, I felt the groundwork had been put in for being very prepared to have a successful and enjoyable experience, which is always what I'm looking for whenever I invest my time, invest my finance, and travel to these things to spend time with instructors. A couple cool things about the event, or basically the venue we were at. It was hosted by High Desert Armory in Reno, Nevada, and they're located about 45 minutes outside of city center. This range did not disappoint. It was dope. It included a couple of bays as well as what could be more than I couldn't count them all. There was at least 100 targets located at various distances extending well beyond 1,000 yards in a lot of cases for that long-range application that we were going to be going after. Everything from large gongs to E-type targets or IPSCs and head variations. There were various like animal silhouettes out there, like turkeys, coyotes, and pigs. It was extensive. The range extends across like a very flat valley for several hundred yards, and then into a canyon before the geography starts to present various terrain and elevation changes way up into the mountains in the skyline of Nevada. It provided all the right challenges for applying the fundamentals and skills for finding and acquiring targets, reading elevation change, wind speed and direction, and ultimately making impacts on target, which is why we were there. It was actually, it was pretty stunning out there as you get out there. A couple other things. There was a classroom on site, and it was equipped with HVAC, where we spent a good deal of time on day 1 and day 3, but those were day ones for each course. Considering it was below 20 degrees Fahrenheit when we arrived each morning, with both ice and snow on the ground, the heated classroom was welcomed. I think everyone was grateful, and certainly grateful for Lewis, who was our range host. Shout out to Lewis, who showed up about an hour early each day to kick the heat on for us before we got there. There are, in addition to that, there are several brand new covered shooting areas and 0 FUDs on the premises, I might add. I got that High Desert Armory is super committed to building a premier shooting facility. All this stuff is fairly brand new, and they're looking to get on the map out there. And they want to host only top-level instructors and courses. So if you're one of those people, think you're qualified, reach out to High Desert Armory and go visit them, get to know them, and maybe have one of your classes out there. Here's a bonus. Unlike a lot of ranges and shooting facilities, this spot is, as I mentioned, close proximity to very affordable accommodations and restaurants and entertainment, family-friendly activities, and so forth. There was one LEO who actually had come down from Oregon. He brought his family, and he was able to have breakfast with the family, get into class, have plenty of time to drive out, get into class for the day, and then get back in time after his family had, spent the day doing touristy stuff and hanging out. He was back for dinner and for the rest of the evening to have a good time. The double bonus is that the Lake Tahoe Basin is less than an hour away from the city center. If you know about the Reno area, I don't know. A lot of times when you go to these things, there's always logistics with, juggling things at home or with work or whatever else, but particularly at home, taking time away. I don't know. I'm just saying, maybe wifey be down for a weekend shooting trip if it meant a little R&R for her in the California Sierras and maybe like Lakeside. So like I said, check out High Desert Armory on IG. All right, let's get into the action. So let's just say I went into day 1 with a mixture of, let's just say excitement and trepidation. Excited because I'd been anticipating this trip for months, and I was ready to learn and test some new skills. And effectively, and I've said this before in other shows, I like being the white belt. So, walking onto the sort of the mat of scoped carbine and PRS-1, I was ready to kind of be the newbie and the learner. The trepidation or anxiety came from, I guess, trying to aggregate all the previous information and experiences surrounding the equipment, to the techniques, math, get back to that one, technology, sort of the list goes on, and just kind of get myself prepared to learn. So I did have a little bit of nervousness going in. I had a high level of conscious incompetence, right? I knew there was a lot of things I did not know. I was okay with that. And I did assume that I would be, drinking from the proverbial fire hose at various stages and points throughout the process. And I was not wrong about that. But very quickly, as we started the day, Joe got into introductions. He was assessing his audience for the weekend and basically setting the tone. Joe's great in front of groups of people. I think first off, he really enjoys doing that. You can tell that, but I think his history and previous job descriptions provided him a lot of opportunity to hone some skills there. So from basically the basic intros, we jumped right into the meat and potatoes. We got into equipment and tool requirements, including the rationale and explanation for different things. Obviously, we're talking about rifles, we're talking about optics, we're talking about bipods, all kinds of different things. And he offered his pros and cons to each. There were plenty of times for questions and time to get clarification on certain things, even maybe debate a couple of things along the way. For someone that was new, this information was dense. I hadn't played in the world a whole lot, so there was a lot of things I was kind of hearing for the first time. It was again, I wasn't overwhelmed. I was just like, okay, I'm just trying to keep up a little bit here. And this was everything from, like I said, rifle platforms, optics, triggers, barrel lengths, bipods, tripods, furniture on your gun, and how all of it could and would play into the big picture, as well as more specifically our training application as we handled the weekend. All right, then you can, if you're going to one of these things, you should expect, and I would hope that you're going to get into the ballistics game. By far the thing I was most interested in and anxious about understanding. I must have watched 75 to 100 YouTube videos on this topic. And this is where you sort of insert that exploding head emoji. If you've ever done that, maybe you can relate, but to say the least, it's a lot for most people and especially for me. What became apparent to me was the gap between understanding ballistics and the actual application of them, given the variables that can exist across the board. And we were going to learn about all of those. There was a moment where I had to, say, take a step back and kind of take a deep breath and remember that I was only 2 hours into maybe a 4-day journey. But knowing that I'm very learn by doing type of person, like I said, I took those breaths, continued taking my copious notes, and just asked every question that I was aware enough to ask. There were other people doing the same. If you go to one of these things and you're just, hoping to kind of sit in the corner and kind of get through and put some rounds down range, I don't think this is the right environment for you. You should probably choose something else if I'm being honest. This is very engaging and interactive as we were going through this stuff. Joe was doing a really good job drawing diagrams. We're using grease boards, using analogies and examples, and he definitely had some props up at the front for us. I think, as I again was asking my question later in the day and the weekend, I discovered I wasn't alone. There were most participants I think were feeling kind of the same. We all commented on that fact as we sort of took our deep breaths together on our breaks and chatted through the morning. The classroom topics you'd expect to get covered in a course like this were covered in detail, and that's what I went for. So, like I said, you're going to get some practical examples, and this includes some of the nuanced pieces. Now, I'm a nuanced guy. I always like getting the meat and potatoes piece, but I always like, so what's the spices? What are the condiments that have been put on the side here to really enhance this or get a little bit different flavor profile to what it is that we're doing? If you've listened to Bruiser or Joe before, he is all about the nuance. And with that, he's going to likely forget more of this stuff than most of us are ever going to learn. Some of you might want to argue with that or debate that, but I think internally he knows this. Like, he knows he's got a lot in there and he wants to get it out, and he does a very good job of sort of breaking each component down into its constituent parts. And I was starting to pick it up. Like I said, a little bit of a fire hose here, but I was starting to pick it up, and I was just trying to keep my confidence and my wits about me as I made it through, and so that it could be digested as easily as possible. And, as the old saying goes, and we were reminded several times, over the weekend, how do you eat a whole elephant? You eat it one bite at a time. So as we got into the details of applying the ballistics theory in practice, there was a deep dive in how to be most effective and efficient as a shooter. And this is where I had to really check my own ADD and anxiety, because we're about to get into what I frequently dread the most, and that is the math, as I mentioned before. Interesting side story. However my brain works, I always had a love-hate relationship with math. In high school, I had to take Algebra 2 twice. It was a major source of disappointment for me. I really beat myself up about it at the time. However, interestingly, I simultaneously enjoyed and excelled at geometry, and I aced AP Physics, which includes that algebra, but it's just kind of that working math, if you will. And then when I got into college, I loathed and I struggled with chemistry and statistics. I might have even had to take chemistry twice as well. I can't remember now, and then at the same time, I was crushing anything accounting and finance. So maybe I'm broken a little bit, or maybe I'm not. But this dichotomy always challenged me. So when the math was coming up, I was a little nervous. So as we were venturing into the mills versus MOC or MOA, BDC, managing your reticle and field of view, establishing and reading wind speed and direction, speed drop, flash milling, and how to put all that together, this was a true test of my ability to really just slow things down and not look like one of those memes that look like a mashup of dude looking like he hit the meth pipe prior to walking into a scene from the movie A Beautiful Mind. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. Here's a plus. A plus was that the lessons learned on using ballistic solvers like apps, and then also the cheat codes that you could find in the Kestrels. These Kestrels are like sent from heaven for a guy like me. I invested in my own, knowing that my challenges where my challenges might exist, and I was looking for as much help and as much of an edge as I could get. And a few others had done the same or had already had theirs for a while. But Joe owns here's the things, Joe owns 20 of these things. And for class participants to use, it's not a class requirement for you to have your own. I just splurged and did my thing. But these little guys became sort of the center of many group huddles later out on the range, because we were all sort of helping each other with the questions that we had about the things that we applied or that we learned or forgotten, in the minutes or the hours that had gone by, and had to relearn, or I guess just be reminded of. They were fun. They're a cool piece of technology, and I will tell you, there were guys there that had lots of experience that were learning many, many new things about these cool little devices and how they interact and interplay with some of the apps that Joe recommends. So things were getting better for me on that front. Here's a couple things. The reality is that I learned what I learned for me in this is there is absolutely no way I could have obtained the deep level of value I received without spending the time going through these challenges in the classroom and in front of a whiteboard with the instructor. This is, very different or unlike most firearms courses I've been to, where 95% of the learning, so to speak, is happening from the firing line. There's usually, an intro. We talk about what we're going to be doing for the day, and then we're kind of just out there and we're starting to shoot, and that's where the teaching happens. And my take on this is that this information, that I was learning, it can't be covered any other way. It just can't. And Joe is, I talked to you guys about my YouTube experience, my Instagram experience, and all that, trying to pull things together. Joe was very good about asking every participant how he could alter this particular portion of the course, so that it might not be, I guess, so classroom heavy. But and this was at the conclusion of each day and each course, for that matter, to a person. Everyone agreed. It was handled in the best way it possible, and given the context of what needed to be taught in the classroom in order to achieve what we did out on the range and ultimately achieved out on the range, it couldn't have been done in a different way. So, and I want to add, this includes individuals with way more practice and with the subject matter and the application of the skills. They were agreed. They learned a ton. For some, it was a little bit of a refresher, but there was nuance and gaps that were being filled. And each person shared their feedback on how and where it was the most impactful for him and where it might be improved. So again, Joe is very much about like, hey, I know this is classroom time. We're sitting in chairs and you're having to listen to me talk and whatnot, but everybody is at the end of the day just going, well, it was definitely worth it because we learned so much. So just something to keep in mind if you're going to one of these things. So I spent a ton of time, probably most time, reflecting on this portion and a good deal of this podcast talking about it because I truly believe the majority of the unconscious incompetence that exists for most students out there in the firearms world lies in this aforementioned sort of subject matter. In this particular case, if you don't gain a solid understanding of the science and the math, and you allow, let's just say, social media to influence your belief system about what is and what isn't possible on the range, you'll wind up in a comment section or on, let's just say, YouTube echo chamber that will give you a false or at least a very limited comprehension, and therefore very limited level of competence, conscious or not. So if you want to live and play and die in that world, be my guest. That's not me. I'll tell you straight up, this isn't the course or the class for you if that's you. Don't invest and don't waste your time. Go film some unoriginal, flashy shooting videos and contribute to the circus that already exists on the interwebs. That's my advice. So, did we actually do any shooting? Yup, we did. A shit ton of it, actually. And we started with where you might expect with a zeroing period. And as we got out there, it's included some skills on building shooting positions. So we were starting to get into, again, the things that are centered around longer distance shooting, things I hadn't had a lot of experience with. Breathing techniques were also included in. And then just some basics behind the gun as we were, again, building these foundational skills. And for those that had some experience, they were getting, again, the little bits and pieces, the little nuggets to help them be better at maybe what they had learned before and what they were already applying. We were all challenged at some level based on the principles of individuality, again, based on our knowledge, but also based on, hey, look, structure, size, the weapons platform you were using, maybe the optic that you were using. And so individuality, and it's this other concept of progression, like what is it going to take in order to move to the next level? What are the little things you can do if you are maybe a little bit more experienced or advanced? And for those of us that weren't, particularly me, what are the bigger rocks you can be moving right now? What are the major things that you should be working on and focusing on in order to have success here? For me, that part felt familiar, I guess, as a coach. This gets into, the difference between being a coach and being an instructor. And I have talked about this in the past in other formats, but what does this mean for me? So my take is this. Instructors deliver the information, they accomplish the goals within the information to be presented, and then they ultimately tick the boxes within the training curriculum. They go down that outline, everything gets covered, it gets done in a timely fashion, all of that is good. However, coaches understand how to do all of this while, I would say, specifically reaching and impacting each individual, attempting to apply and execute the tasks and the requirements of the said curriculum. The difference between the good ones and the not so good ones lies in the reps they've had over the years and the years of practical application of two things, both their craft and the coaching of that craft. Being able to read what a student, client, participant, whatever needs to hear or feel and see so that they really get what it is that you're trying to get across or what it is that they need in order to be better is what separates the pack. It separates the good coaches from the not so good coaches. And I think it does, it draws a clear line between what a coach is and what an instructor is. I guess, barking from the back of the firing line to me isn't coaching. That's instructing. There's nothing wrong with that. I needed coaching in this instance. I didn't need to be barked at. Sometimes I feel like that might be appropriate depending on what you're doing in whatever situation, but addressing individuals as individuals while simultaneously finding ways to make those moments valuable for everyone involved in the coaching, that's coaching. And the dude is skilled. Joe does a really good job. He's talented and he's passionate about coaching. So he'll find a way for the lesson that he's teaching the one person who needs very specific instruction on this one particular thing to be valuable for everybody there. Again, that comes with reps, comes with a few other things too, which we'll talk about later. But like I said, I think the dude, for me, he had my attention and everybody else's. We were off to very good start once we got to the range. So then from there, we moved to dope verification. This is where things begin to get maybe a little bit controversial for some people. And what do I mean? So it's super simple. The internet fuddery and buffoonery will tell you that what began to happen within minutes of us zeroing as a group are impossible. You're just gonna, if we put this stuff out there, if I posted this stuff out there, people go, that didn't happen. That shit's not real. I even hesitate, and I think a lot of people do, and I learned, the reasons why. They hesitate to even talk about it here because some troll is going to respond to whatever clip we cut from this particular episode on social, talking about how such and such a caliber isn't capable of doing this, or it's not capable of doing that I lied or embellished about target distance, or how they've been shooting coyotes on the Grandpappy's farm for 25 years with iron sights at 1,000 yards, or whatever the fuck these jackholes can come up with. I've seen and read some things over my years, but particularly as I've gotten more into the long distance stuff, if there's buffoonery happening anywhere, it is certainly happening in the long distance space. So here's the truth. Here's what happened. Take it or leave it. I really don't care. I'm just giving you what happened for me and the other people. I witnessed this alongside a dozen others that were out there and witnessed the same. Most of us had been limited previously to like 200-yard or shorter ranges. It's just access is sort of a tough thing to do. And I'm finding that could really be kind of the barrier for people to maybe get into this game a little bit more. In areas like where I live in, a pretty, urban/suburban area, and finding ranges to go out and use, to reach out to these distances, it's just not that accessible. Sorry. All but one of us was using a first focal plane optic, and one person was using an EOTech EXPS3 with 5x magnifier. That was the one guy I think I mentioned earlier. 95% of us were shooting 5.56 with 14.5 to 16-inch barrels and the recommended 77 grain ammo. There was one or two rifles, I believe, chambered in like 6.5 Creedmoor. But that said, I just kind of giving you the overview of what was out there. Within minutes of leaving the 100-yard zero range, every single student was successfully and repeatedly hitting C-zone, head size, and E-type targets from prone at 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, and 1,000 yards. And they were doing that pretty easily. Within, I guess, the dude with the magnified optic, obviously the red dot, he was an exception. But he was repeatedly ringing the steel at like 600 yards. And when I say repeatedly, I mean repeatedly. He was not being overly challenged. So I've got to add, this also included, adjusting for wind. It was about 6 to 7 miles per hour and gusting at 15 to 16, where we were located sort of in this little valley I'd mentioned before. But the wind up and into the canyon and the mountains was, I would call it maybe slightly schizophrenic. It wasn't crazy, but it was a little bit different depending on what target location you were shooting at. So there were challenges there. Guys were standing up with, when they were done, they were kind of standing up with big eyes, like Buick hubcap size eyes, and genuinely, I guess, surprised at their successes. They were shocked, as was I. However, I didn't have a lot of litmus here because, I hadn't done a lot of this before. I'd only read, I'd had limited experience with, again, that 300 Win Mag that I was talking about. And that came, was passed down from my uncle to my dad to me. And basically is like, we don't try and shoot anything beyond 400 yards because that's not humane. And I didn't have good, understand ballistics. I didn't understand weather. I didn't understand wind, any of that. It was really just a guess. So this was sort of my first experience really reaching out there. And it was impressive to me. I was kind of in this whole new world. And I'll just say it was awesome. It felt pretty good. I mean, we were off to a really good start. We were only one day into the 2 days. So the discussion, I think, at that point was more about how how they were now understanding. What I mean by this is like between the students. So this discussion changed a little bit, and it was that between the students or the participants there and even the coaches, and it was more about how they were now understanding what they learned in the classroom and how it was coming together despite their previous knowledge and experience. So for me, I was kind of finding my way into that conversation going, this is everything I've learned, and this is how I've been applying it, and it seems to be working out. It's not wrong. Again, I didn't have any biases coming in either way, so maybe it was a little bit easier for me to contemplate this a little bit and get it through my head versus some other people. But bottom line is people were shocked, right? And excited. I would just say that to be doing what they were doing. Now, I want to add something. There's something I left out until now, and that's the whole spotting aspect of this, which is a huge portion of this course. As I've said before on other podcasts, I think cool people tend to hang out with other cool people. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Matt Vanderveer, or you might find him on Instagram at Long Range Actual. Matt shoots ELR, and he came down from Northern California to assist with the weekend. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with ELR, 2 miles. These guys are shooting targets at 2 miles away. That's a long way. At that distance, once the shot breaks off, they basically have enough time to like get off the optic, take a pull from a hot cup of coffee, get back on the optic to see the target impact. It's impressive in my mind, not knowing what I know now. That is a long, long way away. And Matt was out there with Joe, basically on his own time. He just wanted to come down and hang out with the team, and he was spotting and giving us all win calls. Now, I'm gonna tell you, this could have been like the most impactful period for me the entire weekend. There is a skill and an art to this, and I quickly became fascinated with it. There were at least a half dozen high-quality spotting scopes to look through the entire time we were out there. So they were all set up. They were behind shooters. You could take a movement around. You get behind your shooter for the day, or whoever you were helping out for the time, and you got to see through all this. Really, was high-quality glass. And we all began to understand and respect both the responsibilities and the roles for the team spotter, and we really, like for me specifically, like I wanted to know what this magic and sorcery was being applied was all about. It was shocking to me. If I, we all began to, I guess, understand and respect both the responsibilities and the roles for the team spotter. And we were all working to sort of learn the sorcery and magic being employed to put us all on target within 2 to 3 rounds by both Joe and Matt. This literally turned into obsession for me. If I wasn't behind the gun or jamming mags, slamming snacks, and guzzling water, I was on glass trying to figure it all out. I'd seriously, legitimately attend a class to be on glass the entire time for others participating as shooters. To me, it was that intriguing. Attempting to, read terrain features, wind direction, speed, and just help shooters find impact those targets quickly. It was just like impact after impact, and I was listening to these guys. Just they were very, very skillful, and I wanted to know more. Whole new level of respect for sniper teams out there. So if you're one of those guys, have been one of those guys, or are you're currently doing your thing out there, huge hats off. It was something for me. So that kind of wrapped up day one. We were all feeling pretty good, packed up our stuff. The temperature was starting to drop. It got down below 20 again early into the evening. We got the hell out of there, got some food, and then we came back out the next day. The next day was spent sort of compounding all those shooting skills, now with positional changes that included barricades of sort of all kinds. Just sort of obstacles or barricades that we had to work in and around. And with that, it included how to manipulate the rifle, build effective shooting positions based on the use case, depending on what we were doing and where we were, using different support structures or tools brought to or found in the environment. We worked around tripods, and we had a huge lesson on tripods. It was fascinating, actually. I learned a ton. I didn't realize that the tripod in sort of the sniper game is fairly new to the scene with particularly, I think Joe had mentioned, like, they weren't even using tripods till late in his career. So that was interesting. Some of the law enforcement guys out there had spent more time around him as of late, but what a cool tool. And we learned to do lots of things with it outside of just put or attach our rifles to it. We got introduced to equipment application and, along the way, again, shooting bags, backpacks that we might have been using, other things to support ourselves. And we were learning the pros and cons to each of those. It was an entire day of shooting and experiencing what can only be experienced by actually getting behind the gun and shooting. How much shooting? So going back, I went through 260 rounds for those 2 days of scope carbine. It was, for me, I was busy the entire time. Like I said, I was either in a classroom, I was out on the range shooting, I was on glass, I was jamming mags, I was powering food down. We did take some breaks. It's not like we were being starved out there, but we took breaks. But when that wasn't happening, I was on gunner behind glass. So 260 rounds for me felt like a really good 2 days of this distance shooting, keeping in mind nobody's burning it down out there. All the days culminated in a practical challenge. So this is kind of the physical part I alluded to earlier. Joe put together these these basically challenges for us that tested what we had learned. They were, and particularly on the scope carbine, it was a combination of problem solving, movement, efficiency of movement would be included in that. There was definitely physicality and ultimately accuracy. My head got the better of me on this. Wasn't my physical fitness. It wasn't my ability to move or not move. I don't think wasn't even my problem solving skills. I think I kind of set myself up for success right from the beginning. But like I said, my head got the better of me after I struggled on the first target. Frustration crept in. I had missed a couple of rounds, and that was followed by some rushed and poor decision making. Let's just say I was irritated with myself, but after some reflection, right there on the spot, and then even walking away later in the day, I was able to diagnose exactly what I had failed at. Big surprise, it was purely fundamentals. And I'd been the same fundamentals that I'd been, taught, the same fundamentals I had been practicing the entire time until the competition. Lessons learned. I think adding some stress into there, whether you be evaluated or watched by the other members of your class, it wasn't necessarily on a clock. It was more about getting your hits with limited rounds to do that in with a hit requirement. Was what this little game, if you will, was. And I think that's good because I think it puts people in uncomfortable positions. It certainly put me in one and others. Some of the better shooters out there didn't do so hot. Some of the mediocre shooters were doing fine because they slowed it down. So again, a good case for challenging people, and I had a good time with it, albeit I got my ass kicked. Moving on to day 3, I'll keep the PRS portion semi-brief, only because the formats over these days were very similar. Sans the difference between the gas guns we'd been using previously and then the bolt guns we were going to be using on, this was a Sunday and Monday. The group was smaller for PRS, and it included about half the group from Scope Carbine, and a new set of students sort of rolled in that was composed of some regional and federal LEO from their respective SWAT and sniper teams. I want to highlight that because Joe had some unfilled slots for this course, and he reached out to these agencies and offered enrollment on his dime. I think that's commendable, and I don't think anybody can argue that. It was great because it gave these guys an opportunity to come out. They and experience something different, get some reps that they don't typically get. I was talking to him a little bit about that. So again, in today's day and age, when we're talking about, getting cops more training, Joe made sure to put himself out there as a guy that could help provide that for folks. So, like I said, I just wanted to add that and make sure that was acknowledged. The PRS classroom time was comparative to me sort of taking Algebra 2 class for the second time, except this time I didn't feel the disappointment. I actually felt totally relieved. it gave me and other students an opportunity to relearn, I would say like refile and expand upon what I had been immersed in previously or for those previous 2 days. I felt completely different and was doing a lot more head nodding sort of in confirmation than jaw and chest and eyes, crossed in confusion, like I'd mentioned the meme before. My confidence was markedly improved. I was very happy to be back in that classroom and recovering similar concepts. And basically, there was some repeat stuff. Like I said, it was welcomed and it was moving at a really good pace. It was no slower or faster than the day before, keeping in mind we had some new students in there. So Joe was going to need to cover some of the same things again that the other guys didn't get. But like I said, at the breaks and stuff, we were talking with the other guys, the people that have been there the previous 2 days with me, and they were just as happy as I was to be hearing it again and feeling that same sort of boost in confidence and I guess competency as we were moving through. The internal and external ballistics conversation definitely goes a bit deeper here. For those of you that know about this, it definitely digs a little deeper, and we were going to be reaching out to longer distances, and obviously there's extra variables to consider there. But I felt I was able to sort of stack on what I had previously learned, and was able to pick up the nuance of what are the differences between these different rounds, these different guns, these different ballistics as they get applied in the process. Moving forward, the zeroing was quite similar in respect to the carbines, but we had some, again, added nuances based on Joe's extensive experience as a sniper. He's, and long range shooter. If we start to get into the PRS stuff and the things that he's done, he was at this stage, because we had a little bit more advanced guys coming from the LEO side and the guys that had already been there before, we were getting, I think, a little bit extra. I don't know, because I've never taken a class before. I just felt like, man, we were getting a ton of extra value and some of those little nuggets and tidbits we may not have been able to get if this would have been a brand new class, and certainly if this was the first class I had taken, that those nuggets would have gotten by me. I think I mentioned this. I was using a 308, 20-inch 308. Better than 90% of us were using 308s. Various platforms and things, and again, everybody was using those LPVOs. So after we zeroed, we hit the range again, and specifically, the goal was to get out there and true things to 1,000 yards. So this only took minutes. Like I said, given half the group was familiar and confident from the previous day, and the other half were sort of fairly skilled professionals. After we knocked that out and built our dope into the kestrels, we began hitting various targets, various distances and elevations, much like the previous days. Let's just say the success factors became apparent as we closed out day one. It was a really good time. It felt relaxed, fun, but challenging all at the same time, as we were challenging one another and exchanging notes and able to socialize a little bit about what other people were doing and how they were doing it, how they were using things, and why they'd made maybe equipment decisions that they had made. I think that was a really valuable piece of this, because it was very honest and transparent. And it was just kind of right there, those real conversations that we got to have versus the ones that happen, digitally in cyberspace. So, we wrapped up day one, and then we came back for day two. We were immediately out on the range, no classroom time. We moved the distances back to test ourselves right away. So notably, in moving it back, again, remember we'd finished out by truing at about 1,000 yards. We were gonna go much longer today, and notably, one of those law enforcement officers got on his gun for the first shot of the day, and hit it at 1,300 yards. He nailed it. And for me, that was impressive and really set the tone for the last day that we were going to be there. And then as the day went on, we got back into some of that barricade work and position building. I immediately, and we were given some flexibility here, so to do some things in terms of experiment and move around to all the different things that were out there. I immediately went to the places I'd been challenged with the carbine in the previous course, the places where I was having a little bit more of a difficult time to try to get my arms around things that I needed to work on. And other people, they worked So areas that they felt might be more beneficial for them to spend their time in this particular portion of the class, whether it was, tripod work with guys that, use tripods on a regular basis. There were take traps, there were barrels, there were your typical barricades, there were ladders, the huge spools, that you would see like industrial size spools for cable or wire or whatever else. There were lots of stuff for us to get on. I personally like that flexibility that was provided, and I think others did too. I think frequently I find myself in other classes sometimes, standing in line to practice something that may not be the best use of my time based on my personal proficiency, or maybe even in the best interest of the whole group. Sometimes the group gets held up for one or two people, or there's we get off on tangents. This allowed for those tangents to happen, but in a productive way, and for people to get time behind their gun in the ways that they felt would be the most productive for them, all while being coached, up and down the line by the coaches that were there, particularly Joe, making sure he's checking in with each person, challenging them, holding them accountable, and more importantly, just making sure they were getting what they needed. I mentioned that cold weather. The weather sort of changed for the better as the days went on, and the final day presented some unique opportunities to stand behind the spotting scopes and diagnose the weather conditions and sort of watch bullet paths. There was just so much to learn and absorb as everyone, like I guess each shooter, just pushed their limits and pushed their comfort zones. I was grateful for that. I was just trying to soak it up like a sponge. When I enrolled, I was seeking a higher level of competency and performance by way of understanding both the theory and the practical application of all the distance shooting stuff, right? While there's no way to learn or know it all in 4 days, this experience for me was definitely beyond my expectation. And, I think that starts with the people. I find Joe to be a solid mixture of passion, drive, and integrity specific to what and how he presents. I think the knowledge speaks for itself when you spend time around him. And he'll be the first to tell you his resume is not what he hangs his hat on. That said, I think when you combine these aforementioned traits and you add straight up honesty, straight up transparency, and a real healthy dose of humility, you wind up with a diamond in a landscape full of what I can only describe as like semi-polished gemstones and crystals that promise or proclaim godlike status in the firearms space. You know what I'm talking about. And I think the people that he attracts get this. And I know the guys that I spent 4 days with got it, and that's why they came. Because they all publicly said as much. They said it in private conversation, and they said it publicly at the end. For me, like I've said before, I'm privileged and I get opportunities to go around and train maybe more than the average person, right? But that said, it's still an investment of time. It's an investment of money. And, I may have a little bit more flexibility than other people, but I will tell you, I shared stories with people where the one guy was like, listen, man, I get with between the jujitsu and the family and the job, and I got to get my workouts done. And, I got to get the firearms training done, my dry fire during the week, maybe a day at the range. I really only have, opportunity to get out and spend these weekends maybe 2 times a year. So I'm very, very critical about how I choose and what I choose to spend my time. And at the end of this thing, this guy was like, dude, when's the next one? What's there for me next? And so that was talked about. And for me, that just kind of resonated. And here's a guy who's doing all the right things, or at least, attempting to do all the right things as a member of his community, a protector of his family, as a leader at the company that he owns and those kind of things. And he has very limited time. And already he's asking like, well, I only have 2 this year. I got what I felt my money's worth was in this particular instance. I want it again. I think that's pretty telling. And I think that's probably what most people would want. If you're one of those people that's investing in yourself to get better behind the gun in whatever format, Joe doesn't just do, PRS and scope carbine. He does pistol work and other things. I would highly encourage you to check Joe out. He's got a fairly full schedule this year, and he's building his business. He's open for additional events and additional travel should it make sense for him. So, when you're building your business, I've been there, done that. The important thing is getting the word out. I have no problem endorsing, Joe, his company, and the things that he's putting out there for people. I think you kind of get where he's coming from and what type of dude he is if you see some of the stuff he's doing on social media. And I also know that maybe he's not the right guy for you in that sense. That's fine. At least you know. But what I can tell you is if what you're doing is you're seeing and you're looking at Joe on social and you're going, I wonder if that's the same guy. Trust me, he's the same guy. He's all of that and more if you go to one of his courses. So check out Bruiser Industries at bruiserindustries.com, or you can find Joe on Instagram at Bruiser Industries. Check him out. Sign up for one of his classes. I do not think you'll be disappointed.